Welcome everyone. Get Lorenzo up on stage, who's going to be the speaker for the session. I'm building manager and will help you if you receive any tech issues. And if the speakers will come on stage, they turn on their cameras and microphone. So now I move it over to Lorenzo as well, who's going to be chairing this event. And this is the session for how we can move beyond GDP. All right. Lorenzo, mind coming up on stage? Or perhaps Nicola, if you would want to. All right. So it seems, yes, please take it.
Okay, so yeah, so this session, it's nice, it follows on from anyone who is on Tuesday's session, and thank you so much for taking the time out to come along. So, so on Tuesday, we looked at differences between growing economy and a thriving economy. So there are ideas about moving beyond GDP, yeah, and that's what this session will look at. So we've got three really good speakers, Timothée Parrique, Maeve Cohen, and Monica Patesi, who will each go through a different aspect of alternatives to GDP and markers. Lorenzo, do you have anything to add as well?
Can you hear me? Oh, I'm really sorry. So please, all the speaker, if you could turn on your mic and camera. So we are here, as Andrew was correctly saying, at the third session of our team of change. And so that growth of economics has several negative externalities on the planet, on the Earth system, and on the well-being of people in an asymmetrical way between producer and consumer of CO2. We want to discuss alternative measures to GDP that account for social well-being and environmental and ecological impact. So how can we know whether we are on the right path to save our future, as we said? And we are going to discuss this theme with our three guests. Timothée Parrique is a social scientist originally from Versailles, France. He holds a PhD in economics from the Centre d'études et de Recherches pour le Développement, University of Clermont Auvergne, France. I'm very sorry for the pronunciation, but I'm better with English than French. And the Stockholm Resilience Centre, titled The Political Economy of the Growth in 2019. Dissertation explores the economic implication of the ideas of the growth. The second guest is Maeve Cohen. She, apart from being the founder of the Rethinking Economics, is a campaigner, researcher, and organizer working to build inclusive economies that serve people and planet. And she is a project lead at the Social Guarantee, an organization advocating for the collective provision of public services, and a non-executive director at Positive Money. Maeve co-authored the paper for the Women's Budget Group mental network on a Feminist Green New Deal, and continues to produce independent research for this project. So we're going to see also how connective society can bring change in how do we go beyond GDP and growth economics. And the third guest is Monica Patesi, which is she's a full professor of statistics at the Department of Economics and Management of Pisa, and she's director of the Tuscan University Research Center Camillo da Boom on advanced statistics for the equitable and sustainable development. She's member of the teaching board of the PhD program of the University of Pisa, and member of the board of European Master in Official Statistics. She also won several grants for the European Commission, finding suitable measurement according to official statistics and the use of big data. And her presentation will share how we can, in a certain sense, use the new technologies and new advancement in official statistics and measure complex phenomena in our society. Let's start with the Timothée. Then we'll hear from Maeve, and at last we'll have Monica. The floor is yours.
Super. Thank you, Lorenzo. Okay, I'll be sharing my slides. Okay, are you seeing this? Can you see this, Lorenzo? Can I get confirmation?
We do see everything.
Okay, so I can get started, right?
Yes.
Okay, and there is no delay.
No.
Okay. Sorry, I'm paranoid. Okay, hi everyone. So exciting to be here at Rethinking Economics. Now I only see my slides, so I don't see any of you or the other speakers, which makes me feel like I'm just talking alone in my living room, which is sounds like just another Thursday. Cool. So I don't know, many of you were there at the last event with Robert Pollin and Kate Rayworth and Nina Treu. And I think now this is connecting to this, but we're going to get a bit down to a nerdiest part of the issue, which is the question of indicators. And what I'm going to try to show in this brief presentation is that the question of indicators is complicated, but it's only the top of the iceberg of a pile of even more complicated questions. So the first one is that's that big mystery that is, what is economic growth? I've spent the last 12 years studying economics at university, and I finished my PhD last year, which was specifically on trying to understand what economic growth is. But even now, the more I learn about it, the more unsure I am about what it is. So here, the first point I want to make is that when we're talking about GDP, we should not take it as something too solid, in the sense of GDP, gross domestic product, is an estimation of economic activities. So first, it's an estimation. We're trying as national accountants to measure economic activities. And itself, what we call economic activities, and the difference between what is considered economic and non-economic, is a conceptualization. So we make assumptions and say, like, well, we draw the line, and this is, real production, this is non-economic production. So here there's at least a double step gap in between that number we see, that is GDP, and the reality, the complex, messy, interlinked reality that we call an economy. And I want to share something that we don't often say when we talk of economic growth, is that the notion of growth itself is a metaphor. It's a metaphor in the sense of course, we understand that if you're measuring the flow of economic activities, so the volume of monetary transactions, you get yourself a one number. And then, if that number increases from one period to another, you can call this growth. So it's a mathematical increase. But does that mean that that thing, again, in reality, has grown? Not exactly. Here, there's a better way of understanding really that thing we're trying to measure, which is economic growth, is to say that an economy cannot really grow like a plant or a kid, but an economy can do two things. It can expand or it can accelerate. So it can expand, and that we call this extensive growth in economics, when you commodify certain things that were previously not commodified. I think I've got an example. I found this on the internet the other day. So you can just, buy a birthday wish. So this is a whole new commodity. It did not exist before. Before, people used to, wish themselves happy birthday. That was outside of the sphere of economic production. But now, if a company comes here and just makes it a product that can be sold for money, it means that somehow that thing that was outside of the economy is now inside of the GDP economy. So you see, nothing has really changed, but the way that thing that we measured as economic is getting wider. So commodification is widening the size of your economy. And in the same way that, if you buy this once a year, or if you buy this once a week, then it can accelerate, and that works for all commodity. So first, then, we see that when we see an increase in GDP, which is a measure of flow, we cannot really understand whether it's a measure of your economy getting wider or economy accelerating. But those two processes can be either desirable or undesirable depending on when they happen. So here my first point is that the question is not really like to GDP or not to GDP, the question is to try to understand the nature of the changes of social relations that are happening when you have an economy that is accelerating, and when you have an economy, most importantly, that is increasingly commodified. So certain aspects of life, let it be environmental amenities, social relations, or infrastructure, what happens to them when they go from the status of being a non-economic thing to becoming a market commodity? So that's one of the questions. Here, I found this story which I like very much, which is the story of a group of people seizing an abandoned McDonald's that went bankrupt and turning it into a voluntary food bank. So here we see like a McDonald's go bankrupt, GDP would go down, but then you have this somehow spurge of non-economic activity that will not be recorded in GDP. So here just I've put this slide, which you can screenshot, which is, I think, the best 4 books I've found to understand what GDP is, its history, its methodology, and the relation between that, the measurement, and that thing we're trying to measure. So here comes to my second point, which is about like alternative measures of wealth. So it's absolutely uncontroversial today to say that GDP has limits, and I put them here. I'm not going to repeat them. We can have them if you have questions in the discussion. But GDP was an indicator invented in the 1930s. So we're almost celebrating 100 years old of GDP. It's old. It's ancient. It's an elderly indicator. It's been, of course, updated a couple of times, but it has remained the same basis, and these limits still apply today as they applied 100 years ago. So people have come up with alternatives, starting with the first one in 1972, so that was 49 years ago. And ever since, there's been a flurry of alternative indicators. And in the books that I've suggested before, you will see that there are sections to understand, how they're designed, and now there's a lot of information about them. Many of them have interactive websites where you can just look at all the data in real time. But the real question is, why is it so hard to get rid of GDP? So if in 1972 someone came up with an alternative indicator, why didn't we all switch like, oh, cool, I like your GDP idea, let's just switch to that? In the same way that when Simon Kuznets in the 1930s just came up with GDP, just become the overarching indicators for many nations around the world. Why are we not repeating this let's say, improvement and replacement, this creative destruction, you could say, of new indicators? There's creative destruction in the economy, but there is not creative destruction in the measurement of the economy, which is a bit of a paradox. So people, sociologists, have offered many different reasons having to do with path dependency, and the fact that GDP is a standard methodology that was agreed on at the UN level in 1953, and now everyone calculate GDP the same way, so it's good for international comparison. And so if you want to have your own indicators, you would need to somehow coordinate with everyone so that your country remains comparable in this. So there's this coordination aspect, the fact that also it requires some effort to just the whole process of replacing an indicator. Some say there are data problems, that the new indicators are more difficult to work with. The fear of shame, of course, of if you change the indicator to let's say a green GDP, or even a more radical measure of social ecological health, and then you realize that what you've been doing for the last 20 years is just absolutely horrendous. Who would want to do this? So I think there's a bit of fear of just and lifting the veil of GDP would reveal, how exploitative socially and ecologically past policies have been. There's of course a bit of lobbying from the industries that benefits from just, keeping an eye on the economic stuff and ignoring the social and ecological. And one of the most convincing reason I find is what has been termed the ideology of growth. So the fact that for the time GDP has been around, it has ramified into identities and cultural representations, into a broader narrative of progress, where if you go to someone in the street that's just never heard of GDP or how to calculate it, never been to a single class of economics, and you ask them, is growth good? Do you want to see GDP going up? Well, they will say yes, because for them they associate this growth to jobs and eradication of poverty and quality public services and an increase in purchasing power. So there's this idea that all these stuff are linked to GDP, which of course empirically is false, but we can come back to this. So there's this student ski paradox that I find quite interesting. So this guy in the 50s was studying, the development of national accounting. And what he noticed is that every time there's a crisis, governments get real busy, changing indicators. Like, oh shit, this is happening. We really need to find new indicators to know what's going on. But there's not been a change of indicators at after the 2008 financial crisis. And now the question would be, where are our new indicators after the pandemic? So that's also something today we can see as a historical moment of is GDP figures and national accounting as it's been designed and used in the last 100 years helping us to design a post-COVID recovery? In the same way, perhaps we will realize that the pre-GDP forms of early national accounting were insufficient for the US government to handle, let's say the post-depression political action. Now we should realize that perhaps our national accounting framework is misfitted to the task of just building a post-COVID economy. So let's park that question and just come back to this little example. Yes, okay, Le Loi Sas in France. In 2015, this law was voted in. You can see it on top. This is actually just the one paragraph that was just added to the law that basically says that, every year the government should evaluate its policy with a battery of 10 social and ecological indicators. You can see them in the middle. And so they should evaluate what they've done in the past, what they've done in the current year, and what they're planning to do next year. So this was celebrated as, France finally delivering on its Let's Go Beyond GDP pledges that had been going on since Nicolas Sarkozy launched the Beyond GDP initiative. And so now this is in law. This was in 2015, but in practice, it hasn't changed anything. For, I think, at least two reasons. The first one is that you can notice in the law, this red sentence, that this report with the 10 indicators is supposed to be, evaluated alongside with regard to, GDP. So in practice, it's treated a bit as a satellite concern to be like, okay, well, GDP is down in this, and we have this stuff, but let's really care about GDP. Something more important that has to do about the relationship between indicators and decision making. That in France, the budget is being voted at a specific moment. This is why in the law, they say that the government should prepare the report on the first Tuesday of October, so that the numbers are ready when you're voting the budget. So you can decide to, what we've done last year on this has really deteriorated bird diversity, and so maybe we should do something different. Problem, every single year since 2015, the report was given late, so February of the next year, after all decisions was made. So basically it has lost every substance and turned into just some form of, quota making, macroeconomic greenwashing. Oh yeah, and one of my favorite slogans from the May '68 revolt in France, you cannot fall in love with the growth rate. That's so funny because back then in the 60s, that sounded so outrageous to be like so obsessed with GDP growth. But now, like when we read this, it's almost a bit funny because we are in love with GDP growth. That's one of the reasons that explains why it's so difficult to get rid of that indicator and more generally of the obsession with economic growth. So let me move to now take a step and escape a bit that discussion on indicators. Of course, I'll be happy to come back in the discussion and discuss the more methodological points. But here I want to make a broader claim that the talk about indicators is slowing down. It's a bit of a distraction. The question is this, who disagrees about the limits to GDP? Nobody. You take the most radical, mainstream, narrow-minded economist, and even that economist would tell you, yeah, of course, GDP doesn't measure this, just capture only one side of economic wealth, and we need to complement blah, 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 blah. So at the end of that discussion, what are you left with? Just, okay, well, let's just keep doing what we're doing and add some, side indicators to make sure that GDP is not too destructive. So it's an inherently conservative take on economic transformations where we're keeping that thing which we've been trying to measure, let's say the assumption that an economy rates of production and consumption should increase over time, but we're just trying to make sure that it doesn't, impact on bird diversity. I mean, what did they choose bird diversity? This alone tells you that, that indicator framework there was not much thinking put into it. So you cannot change a broken machine by just changing the way you measure it. If you're just about to have a car accident, and just like measuring, looking at something else, it's not going to prevent you from having the accident. Maybe in the very long term, it will prevent you from having more accident, but in the very moment, it's not going to help you much. So I think instead of chatting too much and too technically about indicators in national accounting, we should divert that discussion mainly on institutions. That is, the engine, the inside of the economy, not only the aggregated behavior of it, but getting down and dirty with redesigning, rethinking the machinery of capitalism. I say this because too often the beyond GDP, you maybe present something about degrowth and, something like, very revolutionary about wealth redistribution, or the closing down of some parts of the financial sector, and people would be like, oh yeah, we definitely, and they will bring it back to the discussion of indicators. But indicators, in the same way that if you bring it back to the question of education, which we very often do, like, oh, the key leverage change is really to better educate. Yeah, okay, well, but you're passing the ball. Of course we need new indicators, but in parallel, we also need a new economic system. And that is the priority. And that's going to be my last point of what do we really need to know about what we're doing? How do we need to measure, the way we progress towards that different economy? And here those are the 4 environmental indicators of the SDGs. So, there's 17 SDGs, and there are 4 that are really about the state of the environment. And this is the Sustainable Development goals index. So one of the could be an alternative to GDP, you could say. And look at them, they're terrible. I mean, we're doing terrible on them. Like, there's just like absolutely no progress. It's just telling you what we already know from the IPBS and the IPCC, is that somehow we are, and when I say we, of course, we can politicize this, a minority of heavy producers and consumers are just, you know, destroying the conditions for life on Earth. And what does that tell us? You know, do we need very precise indicators and a lot of data to know that? No, I don't think so. It's an ecological beating. It's just we just need to stop. Then we can discuss on what needs to be stopped. But here, I think the burden of proof is now on the side of the biosphere smashers. I say this in particular relating to discussions of decoupling. So people argue like, oh, you think you want to show that, you know, reducing production and consumption is going to somehow be a strategy to, you know, mitigate climate change. Well, show me your indicators, We should revert the situation. I mean, so far historically, GDP has been correlated with, you know, most environmental pressures. So you want to show us that you can keep growing your production and consumption without keeping the destruction of the planet. Bring your indicators and bring your proof. So far, they've not done this. So I think here, my point is, the faster and the bigger your economy is, the more you need indicators to make sure it doesn't stumble on communities in the planet. So that's the same thing. You know, if you have a used spaceship that's going very fast in space, well, you need like a lot of buttons to just direct it. You don't want to have any accident. But if you have smaller, more local economies, you know, with democratic forums that can be adaptive and, you know, discussing things as they go, you don't need like very precise indicators and a lot of data to know. Like, these economies, they're smaller, they're a bit like, you know, snails in the china shop. So they're not as dangerous as having a bull in a china shop would be, you know, fast and furious capitalist economies. So here the question of indicators also relates to the type of economy you have and how much it's embedded, you know, within the biosphere. And something else is having to do with the idea of the Parrique principle of, again, if we admit that the situation right now is akin to an ecological beating, and there's a lot of uncertainty, then I think it's not a matter of finding a lot of numbers to know that somehow, you know, some form of geoengineering is going to allow us to fix, you know, some of the destruction we're creating today. Rather, I think we should side on the Parrique principle to be like, well, if we have any degree of uncertainty, let's just not do it. Just simply, and here it's very easy to say, because the not do it, the stop rule, does not concern, you know, the eradication of poverty or the development of the global south. So far, it's mostly concerning, you know, the further enrichment of countries that already have enough to live by, but just have failed the task of redistributing that wealth. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop here and leave you maybe with this thought experiment I quite like. Imagine tomorrow the world wakes up with everyone having forgotten how to calculate GDP. What do we do? I think it would be a wonderful experiment, because you would have to re-ask yourself all the basic fundamental question of political economy. What is wealth? What constitutes production? What do we want to produce? How much and how? All these type of questions that now are taken for granted and answered by a minority of narrow-minded mainstream economists could come down to democratic forums, and we could, you know, slowly and carefully, following the principle of precaution, rebuild a better economies from without relying on the crutches of obsolete 100-year-old indicators.
I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me, Tim?
Yep.
Okay. Great. So thank you so much. You have already put a lot of materials in a certain sense. So we have a lot of doubts and a lot of perspective to explore. And thanks for this experiment that we should all think about, not only today, but even in the next months and see what happens at the European and the global level on this matter. And now, if Maeve, could you get the floor and continue this one wonderful journey? Now we can move on. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try and share my screen now. I'm not really sure how this works. Right, bear with. If or not.
We see it.
Right, can you, are my slides up or not?
Not yet.
Are they up now?
Looks like they're about to be. Yeah, perfect.
Okay. There we go. Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's a real dream to be here. Yeah, I've been involved in Rethinking Economics since its very beginning, and I was director of Rethinking Economics up until a couple of years ago. So economic pluralism and campaigning for economic pluralism is just very close to my heart and has been a big part of my life. And after leaving Rethinking, a long time, I wanted to think about how I could put that theory into practice. So that's what I've been doing since then. My slides aren't as good as Timothée's, I will apologize. They were very cool and it was a really interesting discussion. And I want to sort of try and, yeah, I'm not going to talk about indicators at all. I'm going to talk about what the sort of point of our economies are. So hopefully that'll complement quite nicely what Timothée was saying. Yeah, so Nicola asked me to speak on this panel because of the work that I'd done on Feminist Green New Deal. So yeah, so how do we move beyond GDP? One of the things that I've been looking at, and I did some research at the beginning of 2020 with a colleague of mine, Sherilyn McGregor, for the Women's Budget Group and the Women's Environmental Network in the UK on the Green New Deal and making it feminist. So I'm going to talk about that a bit. And just to caveat everything that I'm saying, it's all very UK focused. The work that I do is in the UK, and it's quite well, it's policy orientated and is in a sort of UK context. But I think a lot of the stuff that we talk about will be transferable to other economies. So I'm going to talk a bit about the Green New Deal, and then I'm sneakily going to bring in a project that I'm currently working on called the Social Guarantee. Yeah, so to start us off, the Green New Deal. So as I say, we were asked to look at the proposals for a Green New Deal in the UK and yeah, put a gendered analysis on it and think about what the failings were and how we could yeah, make it better for women, basically. So Sherilyn and I put together this feminist analytical framework, which we then applied to the most prominent Green New Deal plans in the UK at the time. And this, as I say, this was at the start of 2020, and I want to give a shout out to the people that have done Green New Deal plans then and since then, that they've become a lot more people focused. And some of the critiques that we lobbied at them at the time, there has been progress has been made in those areas. But to just briefly go over what we found. Obviously, the dominant factor in all of them was decarbonising the economy. But what they meant by decarbonising the economy in these plans was decarbonising the high polluting industries. And those industries were construction, transport and energy overwhelmingly. And obviously, green tech was going to be integral to decarbonising those high polluting industries. And what wasn't acknowledged or accounted for is that all of these industries are, all of the workforce in these industries are disproportionately male. So investing in these high polluting industries of construction, transport, energy and tech was going to disproportionately benefit men and men's employment. The next thing that they discussed was a just transition. So the stated point of the Green New Deal is to address these twin crises of the environmental crisis and social inequality. And the way that all of these plans proposed addressing this social inequality point was through employment, right? It was through generating employment. So it was only really looking at a very narrow understanding of economic inequality. And the way it was addressing it is through employment, and the way that it was going to generate employment was through creating jobs in all of these high polluting industries that need to be decarbonized. And as I just said, all of these industries are dominated by men. So the sort of social aspect of these Green New Deal plans was all about creating jobs in male-dominated sectors, and we didn't think that that would do much for women. And we also thought it completely overlooked other really important parts of social equality that have got nothing to do with employment. And then lastly, the governance and oversight of these plans we thought wasn't very feminist. So all of these plans were put forward by policy people. So it was think tanks, it was political parties. And this is in contrast to some Green New Deal plans that were coming out of the US, and particularly the LEAP manifesto in Canada, where there'd been a lot more of a grassroots approach and people talking to people about their lived experiences and what they wanted their future economies to look like. And that just was absent completely in the UK plans, and all of the talk about the transition and who would oversee the transition was all very sort of elitist and high level. So they were our main critiques of the Green New Deal. What we put forward for ideas for a feminist Green New Deal was the overarching point, the main take, in fact, of everything that I say today, the main overarching point I want you to take away is that care jobs are green jobs. Right? It's not enough to just be investing in these high polluting industries to decarbonize them, though of course we have to do that. We need to recognize that the already low carbon industries of care are incredibly important to creating a world, a just and a green world, not just during the transition, but also at the end of the transition, right? When we've transitioned into this green feminist utopia. So care jobs are green jobs, and that's really, really important. And of course, when we're thinking about employment, we need to have programs in place that support women to get into these male-dominated sectors in tech and construction and the rest of it. And there are lots of promising projects in this area. But we also need to be thinking about the caring industries and investing in these and valuing these as a society, increasing wages, increasing the good employment practices, increasing training and career progression to make these jobs more attractive across the piece to men and women and to everyone. Yeah, and to really put care at the centre of our economic activity, because in a just green world, low carbon, labour intensive industries are going to be the bedrock of that world. The next thing that we wanted to talk about was a gender equal transition. So I was going to say it's often, it like generally always goes unsaid that a lot of these technologies that have enabled women over the past few decades in the UK to come away from the kitchen sink and get involved in a wider group of political activity, a lot of these technologies aren't very green. And we really need to think about what rolling back those technologies is going to look like. So the point that I always really like to make, I think it's a really good one, is if we're going to ban single-use plastics, which absolutely we should ban single-use plastics, that means getting rid of disposable nappies. That means getting rid of disposable diapers, right? If we get rid of disposable diapers, that's going to increase the amount of work, the amount of labour involved in raising children significantly. And we really need to think about who is going to have to do that additional labour. If it's going to fall on women, or if we can see it in a more holistic way, and we can think, right, we can make jobs out of this. So we need low carbon, sustainable jobs. Let's set up local laundries, right, where somebody comes and collects your nappies, they take them away, they wash them, and they bring them back to your house. That would be a more equitable way of sharing that labour. So it's not saying we shouldn't get rid of single-use plastics. It's saying when we think about these greening technologies, how are we going to distribute the additional labour that comes out of that? Another really good example is locally grown organic food. If we're all eating locally grown organic food, it's a lot more difficult and time-consuming to prepare that food than it is to just bang a microwave meal in the microwave. That additional labour, we need to think about who is doing that and how that extra labour is distributed. And then, yeah, finally, and I've sort of alluded to this, it's not enough to think about what the economy is going to look like while we transition. We need to think about what the end goal is and what the point of the economy, moving away from this point of increasing GDP and profit extraction. If we think that that's not going to work on an environmental level, what is our vision for what the economy is going to look like after we've transitioned? So that'll be what the rest of my talk is about, which is this project that I've been working on called the social guarantee. So the social guarantee is, I suppose, is a policy platform, but it's more like a concept of what is the point of the economy, right? And what we suggest the point of the economy is meeting people's needs. So there's research has been done for decades. We know all this stuff that there are fundamental things that people need in order to be able to participate in society. And without these things, they can't participate. They are not free. Okay. So these things are like food. Obviously, everybody needs nutritious food. They need their bodies to work, right? And the internet in nowadays in the UK, we saw during the pandemic, without the internet, you can do nothing. You can't see a doctor, you can't be educated, you can't see job opportunities, you can't go to job interviews. So the internet is absolutely fundamental to being able to participate in the society in the UK today. Transport, obviously, getting to the doctors, getting to your jobs, getting to your school, that's really important. Also, this transport needs to be sustainable. Housing, it's not just the bricks and mortar, it's also thinking about the utilities within that. So your energy consumption, your water consumption, it's essential that people have access to these things. Childcare, obviously, adult social care, we need to protect the most vulnerable in society. They need looking after. Healthcare, we all need our bodies to function. And education, we all need to be able to participate in society through education. And it should go without saying, and I've not even put it on the slide, but I will say it now. None of these needs can be met within a planet that's burning. So absolutely integral to the social guarantee is a thriving planet, because that is the baseline of how we meet people's needs. So this is the social guarantee. The idea is that we advocate for most of these services, most of these, the provision of access to life's essential, which is a really convoluted way of saying it. I should probably think of an easier way to say this, but basically most of these things will be provided collectively. Obviously, if we're trying to, some of these essential services are just prohibitively expensive for individuals. So if we're trying to get individuals to pay for healthcare and education, for example, they'd have to have a lot of money. And if they didn't have a lot of money, they wouldn't be able to access these things. So we say that these things should be collectively provided and they should be free at the point of use, free or very affordable at the point of use. That said, we acknowledge that some of these things, that doesn't make any sense to do. So for example, food is such an individual, well, I was going to say a preference, but for some it's not a preference, but our needs around food are so individualized that it doesn't really make sense for the state to be sending food parcels to everybody's house. It makes far more sense for people to be able to buy the food that they need. So we recognize that part of meeting people's needs is it's essential that people have a living income. And so they have, we talk about an income floor. So there must be a level that nobody can fall beneath, and people can either be above that level through good jobs or through cash benefits if they're unable to work. So this is the sort of makeup of the social guarantees, it's universal services and a living income. So just very quickly, some of the benefits, and there are many benefits, but these four main benefits of the social guarantee. So first off, and this is where it really chimes well with the Feminist Green New Deal points that I was making, is equality. If you've got this, what we call a social wage of these free services that everybody can access, it's an incredibly redistributive way to organize the economy, because those on low income, which are women, which are ethnically minoritized communities, which are people with disabilities and the rest of it, people on low incomes will disproportionately benefit from access to free services, because they would be spending, if the access wasn't there, they'd be spending a larger portion of their income on it. So collective provision of services combined with a minimum income floor goes a long way towards eradicating poverty. Next up is sustainability. Like, as I say, if you're putting needs at the center of the economy, if the point of all economic and political activity is to meet people's needs, and the fundamental need is a planet that we can all live on, then sustainability becomes integral. Thinking about sustainable aims becomes integral to absolutely every economic and political decision. So it is, yes, it's a more sustainable way of running the economy. It's more efficient. So we know that, for example, private healthcare is massively more expensive than collectively provided healthcare. I mean, basically, profit extraction in and of itself, by definition, costs money, right? You're taking money out of it rather than using that money to make the service better. So collectively provided services are much more efficient, and it also means that people providing the services are able to collaborate with each other rather than compete. So share research, administration functions, and the rest of it. So it's more efficient. And solidarity, and this is a really important point. The social guarantee is about the collective provision of services to meet everybody's needs, okay? And that means that we as a society are saying, like, this is the baseline. We're not going to let anybody fall below this baseline. We're not going to construct a safety net which people can fall down, fall through, get holes in. We're going to build a solid foundation and say nobody's going to go below that level. Everyone's going to have this to build their lives upon. So yeah, the benefits are great. I'll very quickly talk about the principles of it, so it's not so much a vague idea, and you can see that there's been some thought put into this, and it's got some structure to it. So yeah, obviously access to life's essentials is an entitlement, and that means if you don't have access to something that you need, then it is the state's job to come in and ensure that that access is there, and they can either do that through direct provision from the state or by ensuring that that provision can be met by local bodies. Access is based on need rather than ability to pay, so nobody's going to be thrown out of their house because they're too poor. Power is devolved, and this is all about increasing economic democracy and giving communities and service users meaningful input into how their lives run and how to shape their local economies. It's diverse models of ownership and control. So obviously, as I've talked about many different needs, there's many different types of needs. So there's going to be many different ways of meeting those needs. So for example, some things make sense to be delivered by the state. So say a national rail service, it makes sense for that to be delivered by the state. Some things it makes sense for them to be delivered more locally. So retrofitting houses, for example, say you've got every different locality is going to have different weather, it's going to have different geography, it's going to have different culture, it's going to have different styles of houses, and the needs for retrofitting are going to be very place specific. So in the case of retrofitting, it probably makes sense for a local authority to oversee the mass rolling out of retrofitting. Even on a more local scale, if you've got like a home care service, for example, where people go into vulnerable people's homes to look after them, that makes sense to do it on a very small local level where people can interact with each other. So maybe that makes sense for a small care cooperative to deliver that service. So there's different types of needs that require different types of services, which require different types of providers. So we need this diverse model of ownership and control to ensure that we can meet people's needs in a way that's good for them. And this is the bit that I love, because this is like economic pluralism in action, right? This is how we do it on the ground. We need the co-production of services. So again, that means meaningful participation of the people who are the end users of these services. But also, of course, we really do need the technical expertise as well. And that is very important. We need fair pay and fair employment practices. And that's about obviously a real living wage, but it's also about targeting employment to communities that need it. So yeah, hard to reach communities, ensuring that they have access to jobs as well. It needs to be enforceable. This is what Timothée is talking about. Like, we need the metrics to measure if these stuff is being met, because otherwise, how can we enforce them being met? So the state needs to enforce the meeting of people's needs. And then, of course, as I said, and I'll say again till I'm blue in the face, we can't do this if the planet's on fire. So sustainability has to be an integral part of it. And then very, very quickly, lastly, I've talked a lot about the local and about how we do this, with local people, but the role of the state is also really important. So firstly, it's essential that it guarantees equality of access to everybody, and when there's holes in provision, it steps in and fills these holes or ensures that these holes can be filled. It's the role of the state to set and enforce standards, and these are ethical standards, gender standards, environmental standards, and they need to be enforced. It's also the role of the state to collect, invest in funds. Yeah. Okay, that's what I'm finished. Basically, coordinate activity and communication. So yeah, that's.
Okay. Apparently, maybe there is a bit.
Is that all right? Yeah.
Can you hear us?
That was good stuff.
Again, Lorenzo a bit.
Yeah.
You didn't lost anything?
There you go.
Is that all right?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Am I done?
Okay, perfect. So we can move to the last speaker, and we are going to see closer the link between official statistics, big data, and how the development of these and the new techniques can help us in finding new, better, suitable indicators to measure complex phenomena in our society. So, Professor Pratesi, the floor is yours.
Okay, shall I share my screen or is going some?
It's already shared. If you can see it.
Okay, yes, I can see. It's a little bit small for me, but it's okay. It's okay. And are you moving the slides for me?
And it's going to be next slide. Can you put it full screen, Nicola, please?
Okay, it is not moving. Anyway, hello, happy to be here with you. I know that I'm increasing the average age because I think that I am the oldest here. But in any case, this does not matter. But give me the opportunity to see things from another point of view. Inside me, I desperately agree with Timothy and the need of changing from capitalism to another way of producing goods and services and living together. But it is my duty this afternoon to show you what is going on now in the realm of measuring GDP, as you well know, and other indicators accompanying GDP, and what is going on in Europe, and what is the speediness of including SDG indicators, even if they are indicators, no more than indicators, into the policy making today. So, so the focus is two indicators, and they are related to the Beyond GDP approach. Maybe they are useless, but I do not think so, because I'm convinced that the only way for keeping social problems on the agenda is trying to have figures on them. And relating to poverty, this is for sure the only way of not making it disappear. And relating to, just to make an example, gender gaps in employment and also in wages, having numbers is the only way we have in order to understand things and make and do something. So what I'm saying today to you is an overview coming from a project funded by the European Commission, and the name of the project is Maxwell, and you can, if you want, access the website and download deliverables and whatever you want. My point today is that if we want to rethink economics, so rethinking economics is something that we can do with new data and innovating statistical production. This is for extending and improving not only the quality, the intrinsic quality of the available information, but also, and before all, and I would say for sure, improving the relevance of what we are producing, or the figures we are producing. Can you move? So there are three questions. And they are regarding the world as it is now, not as we would like it to be. So in member states, Europe, which frameworks have been adopted to measure well-being? They are not perfect frameworks, we know. And then which advancements have been made by national statistical institutes to implement the SDGs? And which is their use for policymaking across the Europe 28 countries? Please go on. Okay, so for what concerns the frameworks adopted, we must say three things. And these things are that, first of all, saying beyond GDP is something that in the last decades we have in our brain, our mind, but do not believe that every man on the earth has the same idea on or scenario of what being beyond GDP means. There is a narrative that it is still lacking, and I think that also there is we are running the risk of substituting this narrative with another narrative that is the sustainability narrative, for which we are building electric cars and so on, the green transport system and so on. But what we are doing, to be honest, is nothing different than before. The only thing is that electric batteries are not polluting environment now. Their destiny is to pollute environment tomorrow. So this beyond GDP narrative is still not so diffuse, and I would say that we need to avoid the risk of substituting this narrative with the sustainability narrative. But to be honest, when I was a child, when I was a young student, concepts like as social indicators, basic needs, human development, sustainable development, quality of life, societal progress, in quotes, they were not so common. So we have done a lot. I wouldn't say that we have made progress, but I must admit that our vision, our perspective is a little bit larger than before. So the milestones of this debate have been already cited by you, but are the, excuse me, my bad pronunciation, Brundtland Report, Human Development Reports, and the so-called Stiglitz and Fitoussi Report. You can have other citations on this if you consult, if you read the two reports I have cited here as sources. Please go on. So in the meanwhile, I mean, while these things were happening, the National Statistical Institutes were producing data. So limiting the focus to the European statistical system, we must say that National Statistical Institutes have started up to publish values of indicators called Sustainable Development Goals indicators. They are required for the implementation of the Agenda 2030 for the sustainable development. I imagine that you know that there are 17 goals, 70 objectives, 70 directions, and 169 targets on all dimensions of human life and of our planet. Again, if you want to know more, you can consult the references here. Please go on. But in any case, just to be a little bit more, I would say, intrusive in life of national statistical institutes and member states, we can see here two tables. These two tables are based on a review. The review is based on information collected through consultations with national statistical institutes and other relevant agencies. We have done it under the Maxwell project. And the analysis of the country reports shows that 19 member states developed a framework on well-being. In 11 cases, they are used in the national policy cycle, you can see from the table. For 12 countries, indicators are available below the national level. And this is relevant because only knowing what is going on at regional and sub-regional, possibly local level, intending for local, the places where people live, only knowing this at a very disaggregated and detailed level can give you a real, in quotes, measure of what well-being is. It is interesting to note that how the use of indicators of well-being in policy, in the policy cycle, is sometimes driven by the framework identified by the National Statistical Institute. This is for in Italy, to be honest. And some other times, it is the government requesting the NSIs to produce indicators on well-being to be monitored through the policy cycle. And this is what is going on in Sweden, France, and Belgium. What is an indicator? In this context, I must say to you that there is an European definition given by the European Statistical System Committee, and this gives us the definition of indicator, and indicator is a particular subset of statistical information, not only a number, okay, directly related to a special purpose, such as monitoring specific policy objectives. So there is a large definition. Many things can be considered as indicators. So please go on. And to be honest, things are changing, and the idea is that these changes are visible through statistics, through indicators, through numbers, are visible and are something that can drive us towards the so-called sustainable development goal or not. So I must say that, go on please. We had a very bad situation in the last 2 years, and this is known from indicators, and this is it is a matter of fact. I have a better evidence of what have been the Italian situation for sure. So with reference to Sustainable Development Goal number 1, number 10, and number 4, I might say that in Italy we had a loss of income, and this provoked an increase in poverty in all its dimensions, not only monetary or income-based dimensions. The same for what concerns migrants, living conditions of migrants or refugees, and the same for what concerns the education, because we had schools and university closed, an increase in digital study modes, and this obviously was the only way of doing it. So internet is a sort of basic need nowadays. I agree with Maeve, but this but we have to consider that distance learning is less effective, and this is a matter of fact, and above all is not accessible for everyone. So nowadays I can say that there is an increasing inequality everywhere, but great diversity. Please go on. Oh, this is not as good as I thought, but in any case, these are 4 lines. This is the trend in absolute poverty in Italy. I am saying absolute poverty. I want you to make. I would like to make sure, okay, that absolute is different than relative. So absolute means that it is a number based on an absolute poverty basket. That is a basket of goods and services considered basic, as maybe internet is nowadays. This basket was not so modern, to be honest, but the absolute, it is the essential one, and it has been priced using local markets, so the places where people live. The Italian Statistical Institute is the only one in Europe making this kind of measurement, and the percentage of households falling below the absolute poverty threshold is what you can see here I imagine, represented by the line. And you can observe that the behavior is different in northern, central, and southern part of Italy. About 1.7 million of households considered absolute poor, so it is a big issue. Here you miss the 2020 value, but if you go on, you can see it. Please go on with the slide. So 2020, the data are the data you can read since last June on the Istat website, and you see that 9.4% of households in absolute poverty in Mezzogiorno in Italy, other figures for central and northern part. Number of minors in absolute poverty, they are a lot, 1.3 million. And then the incidence of absolute poverty in foreigners, residents in Italy, they are migrants in few words, but with permission of staying in Italy, it is 29.3%, so very, very large in comparison with the figures of Italians. So the issue is that even if we are trying to go beyond GDP, and even if we are considering that poverty can be, relative poverty can be, in quotes, an all-capitalist measure, we must admit that if you are poor, you are poor. This is a matter of fact. If you have money to go on and to buy the essential basket of goods and services to stay in a decent standard in the place where you live, it means that you are not going towards a sustainable development goal. But even if in some countries like Italy and other countries in the European Union, we are collecting data, meaningful data, relevant data, and timely data, because also timeliness, as Timothée said, is a very important aspect of data quality. We are still at the very beginning, because not all the targets, the SDGs targets are covered. And so what we need to do is to go towards a complete coverage of all SDG targets. And then there are new phenomena. There are migration, abandoned minors, disasters, new form of organization of economic production through global and multinational value chains, circular economics, food losses. These are all phenomena not completely measured by current statistics. And so we need to introduce innovative processes for making such an enlarged production cost effective. Because there is something that you need to know, that produce meaningful numbers, having these data sets cost money. And generally governments are not so fond of giving money to give a budget to the official statisticians in order to produce credible, trustable numbers to put evidence on the phenomena. In general, they prefer to allocate this budget maybe to, I would like to say, maybe to alleviate poverty somewhere, but it is not so. So it is important to keep poverty and also green economy issues on the agenda, that we have statistics. And possibly the thing that I think it is necessary to do is to have primary social and environmental statistics, extended statistics, the extension of national accounts to social and environmental issues. It is not today. Today it is not done everywhere. So there is still this step to do. And then a higher resolution of data used, because only this can be a basis for evidence-based policy and its evaluation. And then we need also to extend statistical literacy through formal and informal education. Otherwise, we are not able to understand what is going on with numbers. Numbers are in some sense considered like mythological entities. We are trusting them without any criticism, or simply denying them, considering useless. It is not true. Truth is in the middle. So we need to be statistically aware, and we need to have improved our statistical literacy. Please go on. So another issue is that for a long time, official statistics has been considered the only data producer. And we tended to distinguish between official, private, and public statistics. But this model is incomplete and old-fashioned. We need to invest in open data, and we need to facilitate electronic infrastructure and horizontal data services, which are the only way of allowing for cross-disciplinary usage of information. And this is another inequality. So the asymmetry on the possibility of using information, that together with data literacy and statistical literacy are producing a big inequality in the ability and possibility of understanding the world. Please go on. So there are changes in this scenario, and these are, I would say, changes. They are changes that are going towards a simplified, improved, and widened possibility of data access for researchers, for you, I mean, who are interested in studying economics. You should be able to access all the data you need. Otherwise, they are not common goods, they are private goods, and they are useless. And this is obtained, according to me, if we are going towards data co-creation, using the involvement of citizens in the data production, because this should be a sort of bottom-up process, not top-down. So I'm cooperating to create the numbers that are describing the place where I live. And so I am able to judge their values. I am able to see if they are effectively corresponding to the real life, the day-by-day life in my place. And also because we are moving towards a data economy, and we should consider also this one. Data are considered the fuel of this millennium. And if you want to know more on these issues, please, you can use the reference I have listed here. There is a beautiful working paper by three researchers of the Bank of Italy, that is Principled Data Access, Building Public-Private Data Partnership for Better Official Statistics. And this is more important than we can believe, because there are companies producing data, selling data, and producing narratives using this data without having audiences able to understand, to deny, to criticize, to interpret if they are going towards a realistic scenario and realistic representation of reality or not. Please go on. So if you have questions, I'm here for you for, I wouldn't say the whole afternoon, but 10, 20 minutes, and that's all from my side. Many thanks.
So thank you so much, Professor Parrique, for your enlightening points on big data and official statistics. If also the other speaker could turn on their mic and camera, we would approach the question and answer session. So I think there is a question winning for all winning for all that maybe should be answered alone. So let me just read it out to all of you, and you can give the answer in the order you prefer. So how do we turn these demands for changing the underlying paradigms into practice, especially thinking of international financial institutions like the World Bank? Who wants to be first?
Shall I go?
Sure.
I can give my suggestion. I have always thought that things can be changed by from inside. So the best thing is to know perfectly how the mechanism is working, how the gas production model is working, what it is. The idea I am talking about poverty of World Bank, why they have this idea of $1.29 a day as a poverty line threshold. And when you have completely understood, you can criticize and you can change the way of doing things. I must say that sometimes it works. I mean, no one alone can change the world. This is a matter of fact. But I think that education and open-mindedness is something that can be useful.
I can have a go next.
Please.
Yeah. I think I'm not thinking about international financial institutions like the World Bank. I'll leave that to people who know more about that than me. But I think that about turning these demands for change into practice is already happening. It's already happening across the world, and it's happening particularly on a sort of local authority, local city level. So you've got cities like Barcelona doing absolutely incredible stuff about thinking about how they're going to do politics, how they're reorganizing their economies. What I think they're bringing in a commitment that no adult will be more than 200 meters away from some green space. You've got places like Preston in the UK doing it, Islington, North Ayrshire, all across this country. You've got places in Syria, places in America. There are municipalities and local governments across the world that are implementing new economic ideas without waiting for the say-so from the international institutions, without waiting for the say-so from, in this country, from the far-right national governments, and putting this stuff into practice on the ground at this local democratic level where people are as close as they can be to their democracies. They're able to engage in their democracies on an immediate level. So I think it's not a thing of the future, putting this stuff into practice. This stuff is happening on a local level across the world. And I would really encourage you to look into things like radical municipalism, community wealth building, the feminization of politics, and all these different theories that are actually being implemented on the ground.
I'm going to follow up on that and say that we should turn the question around is how do we turn certain practices into a new paradigm? If I've learned anything in studying the history of economic systems, that you always see like different mentality coexisting. There's no such thing as one homogeneous, economic system, and then we call it capitalism, and then we want to change it like you're changing, from a car to a bike. There are always different practices and mentalities, identities existing within that economy, different institutions, some of them being, if we take that division capitalist, other being anti-capitalist. So today we just have to pick the practices that we like, and then we make this the new paradigm. And actually, this is our things I've been doing. And if you, I highly recommend the PhD thesis of Matthias Schmelzer, wrote about the history of GDP, and actually he showed that it took decades for that very odd, awkward measurement that no politicians wanted to touch. They were all like, come on, it's silly. I'm not going to base my national politics on this GDP thing. And he showed that the practice of calculating GDP and taking it into account in governance was actually took decades to develop and become hegemonic. So now we have to learn from that history and realize that we just need to launch another process of picking one practice on the fringe and making it hegemonic. A little critical reaction to something Monica said about getting the stuff before being able to criticize. I mean, I've got 1 bachelor, 2 masters, 1 PhD in economics, 12 years of study, and I've read the system of national account, every 720 pages of it twice. And I can tell you, I'm only starting to really understand, that thing we call economic growth and the way we measure it. So I don't think that's a viable strategy if we put this against the climate deadline that we have. And also, I think we can learn from history that we've lost perhaps 10 years or even more, debating decoupling, in the same way that we've lost decades decoupling trickle-down theories, being misled by economists that we're just like, oh, you guys don't understand, just do the studies, get to know neoclassical economics, and then you'll be able to debate us. And, now we realize that actually all of it was bullshit. And now, trickle-down theories, nobody will just dare, after, what Piketty has done, falsificating this. So in the same way that, I don't know barely anything about astrology, but, that's just already fairly enough, or flat earth theory, to know that I don't consider this like very important. I would not say I need, 5 years to really get down to flat earth theory to criticize it. Today, many of the myths that have been, let's say, dominant, but in mainstream economics for decades, need to be shut down, need to be falsified, need to be debunked. And I think that we don't need enormous amount of data to do this. Actually, they can just be debunked at a theoretical level. Again, that's what I meant by the reversal of the burden of proof. If you want to show that decoupling is possible, show me the data, develop indicators, do the work to actually show that it is. It's very easy to show that it's not, happening the way we would like. So just a little critical spark of discussion here.
Monica, do you want to answer?
Oh, yes, to Timothy. Yes, but I am on your side. Be careful. The only thing I say is that if you want to change something, you must go inside. From outside, if it is only a different narrative to opponent to the current narrative, you are not obtaining anything. Okay, this is the real thing. So I think that we should start from local levels and local awareness of what is going on and local practices into new paradigms. But to do this, you need to be inside the National Statistical Institutes if you want to translate it in numbers. Otherwise, you're out. This is the final message I would like to give. And we need few numbers, but if these few numbers are shown by me and you, they are not enough. Okay.
Maeve, do you want to give your to stand on this very interesting debate?
Well, I'm very aware that we're over time now, but yeah, I would just say that, I mean, similarly to Timothée, like, just get out. I'm a big fan of developing alternatives and just getting on with it. Like, don't ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. Like, we know what we can do better, so we should just start doing that where we can. I recognize that there's a really important thing of people coming, like people within institutions changing it, and that was a big part of the theory of change of rethinking economics, was creating economists who will enter these institutions and change them from the inside. That personally is not my strength. I think it takes both changing things from the inside and just people showing viable alternatives to create these changes.
Okay, so we can have a brief round of other questions if you all agree to stay a little bit longer, and then we can.
I can't stay a little bit longer. I've got to go, I'm afraid. I'm sorry about this.
Okay, then maybe it's better to end this webinar here. I really want to thank you for all your great contribution and, in a certain sense, pushes and triggers to do research, to understand better data, and to be critique and always try to rethink processes, how things are done, how data are collected. So we're
It's been really good, and just to summarize, in my understanding, it's the tension between how to change things from the inside and if you want to give viable options on the outside of what it currently is. I think that's great points for discussion further in the rooms as well. So thank you, everyone. We'll stop.
Yeah, and moreover, we just saw the point that the revolution is to be both top down and bottom down, but the bottom down is more important. So the next event, so the workshop on the local initiatives, will let us understand better how to transform these practices into paradigms, as our guests were saying. So
Thank
see you in a
all.
bit.
Thank
guys.
you so much.
Ciao.
For having us.
Bye.
Bye, grazie. Ciao.
Ciao.